the cloud. Greetings, everyone. My name is Anthony Mills. I'm the Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute in the United States. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, which is entitled How Innovation is Changing Course and Why It's More Important Than Ever. Our guest today is Mr. Brian Solis. Brian is a world-renowned digital anthropologist and futurist who now serves as Global Innovation Strategist, or evangelist at Salesforce. Brian is also an 8 times best-selling author, an international keynote speaker, and Forbes has called Brian one of the more creative and brilliant business minds of our time. And ZDNet has said that Brian is one of the 21st century business world's leading thinkers. Over the past 20 years, Brian has studied digital Darwinism to understand the impact of disruption on businesses, markets, and society. In his work, Brian humanizes emerging and disruptive trends to help leaders see new and more meaningful possibilities for digital transformation and innovation. His research explores innovation, digital transformation, experience design, customer experience, artificial intelligence, in the cognitive enterprise, as well as human behavior. His insights on the state and future of digital trends have made him a go-to resource among media and market experts. Brian has now published over 60 research papers and actively shares his work in industry-leading publications, including Forbes, ZDNet, CIO, eWeek, Fast Company, Adweek, and Singularity University. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Brian Solis as we explore how innovation is changing course and why it's more important than ever. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony, and hello, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day. It's very rare, I know, when you get to join a Zoom meeting, but we'll make this as exciting as possible. I put together some slides, and as Anthony shared with you, we're going to look at how innovation has changed. Specifically, I want to share with you the work that I've done at Salesforce over the last year. I shelved much of my research on innovation, digital Darwinism, and all forms of things leading into the pandemic to hyper focus on what the pandemic has specifically done to then help us prioritize our innovation strategies and our transformation strategies, moving into what I'm calling the great reemergence, that post-vaccine state where we actually start to go out and spread our wings. And nothing really says innovation like PowerPoint. So I am going to throw up here our slides. Anthony, can you verify that we're looking good on that? In just a second here, and voila. All right.
You're up and good.
Excellent. Okay, well, on that note, I wanted to focus specifically on experience and digital experience as a catalyst for innovation. So while we all talk about organization-wide transformation, when we look at corporate ventures, we look at innovation labs, I specifically want to spend our time today looking at an area of innovation within the organization that is a force functioning device. And by force functioning, I mean that the world has been changing pretty dramatically for the last 20 years. But specifically, this year has focused our efforts, at least with those progressive companies, our efforts on what needs to happen right now and what needs to change behind the scenes in order to enable what continues to unfold. And that's what I'll share with you here today. What has been immediately clear overnight is that the reason we have an accelerated change for the last 20 years has actually been a human block, meaning that the way we think, the way we see the world, the way that we measure success has largely been rooted in the past. Totally cool, because that's normal. Change is hard, change is overwhelming, change can be expensive, and all of those things tend to be the enemies of innovation and progress. But also all of these things are getting in the way of transforming as quickly as we need to in order to survive these crazy times and thrive in what many are calling in the next normal. I have been studying for 20 years what I call digital Darwinism. And just to kind of explain it clearly, whether you're an optimist or pessimist, it is not necessarily, by definition, a bad thing. It just simply says that society evolves as a result of technology's impact within it, how we work, how we live. And as a result, our, meaning people, our behavior changes, our expectations change, our norms change, our standards change, how we communicate, how we interact, how we don't communicate, our values. These types of things evolve strangely as our relationship with technology tends to impact our lives. And I say strangely because a lot of times it's subconscious. So, for example, if you watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix, you could see, for example, how social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, how those applications have changed individuals, regardless of age, uh, forever. And we could talk about whether it's for better or for worse, but the thing is that it's changed. And those types of changes affect how someone makes a decision, how someone goes through the customer journey, how somebody finds a product that they want to buy, how somebody aligns with the values of an organization, how what somebody expects in each touch point and how they expect to interact and communicate. So this is where digital Darwinism plays a pivotal role in evolution, in that either we keep up with how society is transforming, and we can change the word society with markets, for example, or we don't keep up, or we look to excel to get ahead of this. The reason I've studied this so profoundly for the last couple of decades is because it is only becoming more and more prominent as the world becomes more and more digital. And what we saw in the last year is that basically it wasn't just early adopters, it wasn't just Generation Y or Generation Z uh, leading the path for digital. It's now everybody. And a lot of that has to do with just the reality of a pandemic. So, digital Darwinism post pandemic is also set to become more and more prominent because of what many are talking about as the fourth industrial revolution. But if you take out a fancy term like that, essentially what we're saying is that in every facet of our work, technology is only going to continue to profoundly change it and influence it. So automation, AI, machine learning, which is now starting to unfold and accelerate because of the pandemic, 5G on the horizon, AR, VR. In fact, some very compelling AR applications have emerged as a result of the pandemic. But everything from cybersecurity to digital twins to personalization at the edge, blockchain. If anybody's following, for example, non-fungible coins or NFC in cryptocurrency, I mean, things are just starting to boil over. In fact, there's a fantastic story in Rolling Stone, and it is the Kings of Leon. Not every day where the Kings of Leon make one of my presentations, but they had a fantastic story in Rolling Stone yesterday that talks about how they're going to be the first band ever to sell their music via NFC, which is a form of cryptocurrency specific for art. But you can see now that innovation, I doubt that without the pandemic, NFCs would have been a thing in the music industry that quickly. But this is the acceleration of adoption of new technology, which is going to further change society, markets, and then thus we're going to have to keep reverse engineering how to stay ahead of this. So when we talk about the next big thing, I'm always asked, hey, Brian, what's the next big thing? What's the world going to look like in 10 years? I can tell you that anything that I predicted before the pandemic is now being reassessed. But there's a reason why disruptive times lead to great ideas. There's a famous saying in Silicon Valley that constraint forces creativity. So when you can't see the answer, you make the answer or you create the answer. And this has been where, in my work before and after my role at Salesforce, specifically looks at helping businesses innovate by first helping those in charge, the C suite, all the way to decision makers, everyone involved with transformation, to first see that the role towards innovation is actually a personal commitment that you make to yourself to challenge your own conventions, to challenge your own beliefs, to challenge your own standards and metrics for success in order to see new possibilities in their full glory. And the reason why this is a challenge is because most of us have either been sucked into innovation or forced into it. uh, I chose to try to work in innovation at the beginning of my career, and that explains why it's been, an uphill battle for most of the work, because it's really a human issue that we have to get through first, right? Because everything about innovation goes against the norms of how we work. It also goes against the norms of, for example, uh, our life at home, in school. We are taught to follow the rules, and those rules put together a very solid construct of which guides us through life. Innovation basically says that we need to break those rules or bend those rules, that we need to invest resources in breaking those rules in order to open up new paths. But when you invest existing resources into opening up an unproven path, well, then logic sets in and basically says, well, you're taking away from shareholder value or stakeholder value, or from our returns, or from our quarter to quarter performance. And so essentially, we put up an automatic wall towards experimentation. Yet innovation itself is the thing that helps us compete for the future, which is why I believe that there's a parallel investment that we need to consider here, which is we have operational innovation, we have business model innovation, and then we also have the things that work. So iteration. So we have to constantly improve those to make them better, because those are the things that are driving most of the revenue today, without losing the fact that we have to build towards what is eventually going to be present and future revenue that will offset this revenue. And eventually this side will become the iteration, and we'll have to constantly invest in what's new. The key here, though, is to accept and appreciate that we often use the word innovation in the wrong context. So a lot of times I work, and I specifically choose to work with legacy companies and industries, because I feel like that's the biggest opportunity to help bring about change. I also have spent the majority of my career working with startups and continue to do that, because I have to keep up pace in that thinking, and also the street cred. But when larger organizations use the word innovation, it is confused with something that is new to us. So, for example, uh, NFTs or NFCs in the music industry is in fact innovation because it's new to them, but it's also new to the consumer. And so it's pushing everybody forward. But if, let's just say, uh, the music industry was going to allow for electronic payments through Spotify or live video, that is not as much innovation as it is iteration, in that the consumer sees that as just an extension of how they do things anyway. But it is new to us, so we see it as innovative. So we have to constantly balance the stride between what is actual iteration and what is innovation, so that we're moving both forward continuously, because that gets confusing. In fact, in research I did with Capgemini a couple of years ago, we led, I think, 3 or 4 research reports in a series dedicated to corporate innovation. It was the first of its kind, and we found some of the biggest gaps. Whereas executives and boards saw the company as being more innovative than actual employees saw it as being not as innovative, for example. So you create this delta. So then I started to research, well, what is it that executives aren't actually getting and employees are seeing? And it's really just this frontline mentality. From a market perspective, does the customer see it as innovative, or do they see it as iterative, or do they just see it as outdated, right? So iteration, just simple terminology, is to say, for example, taking new technology, bringing it into the organization to do the same things better, right? It's new to us, therefore it might appear innovative, but it's really just iterative. It's just doing the same exact infrastructure, but better at scale, more efficiently. One example of this could be AI-powered chatbots or automation in chatbots that we're seeing in customer service. So It takes existing service infrastructure and makes it more efficient. It actually also allows for a machine to engage a human being in a human way until either they could solve the answer or they need to bring in a human being. Innovation is doing new things that create new value for the organization and also, for example, for the customer. So bringing AI to have a conversation with the customer and automatically recognize based on similar interactions that they could solve it conversationally, that could be innovation because it doesn't exist before. And the interesting thing here that we see is that the combination of iteration and innovation can help us create disruption, good disruption, creative disruption that takes these things and makes the old things obsolete. And this is powerful because what we have seen is disruption when it's affecting us, but we haven't really talked about as much, and we need to, disruption as the result of good work and iteration and innovation to make our old things obsolete. So essentially, we're disrupting ourselves because we're improving over time. This is important because what is happening today is what I call the novel economy. And it was inspired, of course, by the novel coronavirus, because novel itself means new and unusual. This is why, for example, with the novel coronavirus, we're caught off guard. It takes time to understand what's happening in order to best respond, because there is no playbook, because there is no series of best practices or case studies that we could follow. And so we have to invent forward. When we talk about these times, for example, as the new normal, and we talk about the future as the next normal, it's actually a mental framework that we box ourselves in by trying to get back to a sense of normal, which is normal. But there's nothing that says that in times of great disruption, we can't invent forward. In fact, earlier when I asked the question is, why is it that great ideas tend to come out in times of disruption? It's because it's a force functioning device. It is someone saying, the future doesn't have to be the way that it was. We can move forward differently. And that's where I want to share with you that inspiration, that catalyst that allows us to accelerate innovation in areas that are actually going to have business impact. So the way that I talk about the new normal, next normal, is this novel economy in 3 stages. So during the early days of the pandemic, and up until recently, what we saw was stabilization, which was phase 1, right? Reaction to the crisis, stabilize, ensure business continuity, working from home, e-commerce. In retail sectors, we saw like buying online, picking up in store, curbside pickup or delivery. Those are things that we had to do in order to try to maximize whatever business we could. Then we moved into where we are today, which is phase 2, which is staying alive, which is actually building infrastructure to ensure and maintain this, for example, this digital first infrastructure, training against it, technology, moving to the cloud, for example, adopting automation, implementing AI. And the next phase, which is the post-vaccine era, which is thrive. This is where it's important. So again, great ideas come out of these times. And so we have to ask ourselves, what side of that do we want to be on? So right now, between our phase 2 and what lies ahead for phase 3, so we were on this trajectory, right, before the pandemic. Pandemic forced us to then start to do things differently, which actually changed our trajectory. A lot of businesses are finding new ways to thrive right now during this time. So now think about where you want to be in the post-vaccine great reemergence, as I'm calling it. Because if you start to think about business model innovation, things that you could do differently that you didn't do or couldn't do before, you're going to actually come out of this in a different trajectory. So it's a matter of choice. Your roadmaps are going to point you in one of these directions. So this is where I think a lot of work in the novel economy for this next economy is essentially saying, what do we want to do? Who do we want to be? And how are we going to do it so that we can start making those investments right now? Because this is what's happening. I promise you that organizations right now are looking at excelling out of this with greater velocity. So where I am seeing tremendous strides in innovation right now, in product, in service, and experience is in customer experience. So anything that's customer facing right now, uh, because it leads to loyalty, it leads to lifetime value increases. And so the reason why this has become so prominent right now is because the rate of evolution in customer behaviors, preferences, values, expectations, I've never seen anything like it. I've been, like I said, I've been studying for this for 20 years. I've never seen acceleration and change like I've seen in the last year. And there's a reason for that. So I want to walk you through some of the research that got us to the pandemic and then the post-pandemic, so you can kind of work with me and hopefully translate this back into the organization so that we can see the need and the opportunity for this change. So when we talk about data, when we talk about insights, what we're really talking about is in a digital first world, and also now that we're able to capture data and make connections between offline behavior and online behavior, essentially what we're doing is we're stitching together this customer and series of customers, the journey that they go through, and opportunities to understand then how to deliver excellence in each one of those touch points, and then collectively as an overall customer experience. And those insights essentially then say, well, we don't work that way today. I don't have insights from that group because they are that group and I am in this group, and this group is holding data that neither one of us have access to. So where we've seen rapid opportunities for change, or even just seeing opportunities for change, has been these folks talking to each other and sharing insights and making shifts to cloud, making shifts to data, for example, data visualization, data analytics, so that we can make sense of what is changing, what's happening, and what we need to do about it. This has been something that's been going on for 20 years, but now there is no choice. In order to keep up, we have to understand what's happening. So over the last, let's just say, going back to the days of Amazon.com, when it disrupted retail, going back to the days of the consumerization of the internet, going to the days of the iPhone in 2006, 2007, whatever year that was, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these big consumer-facing technology revolutions created what I had called Generation C, which stood for connected. It was a generation of customers that just wasn't just millennials. It was essentially saying anybody who has one of these devices, who lives life online, who uses Uber, who uses DoorDash or Postmates, going back to those days, you start to change as a consumer. I call this accidental narcissist, because what you learn is everything that happens here happens fast, it happens for you, and it starts to condition you or train you that that's the way all things should be. So you don't necessarily over time say, well, that's this industry, I can't necessarily expect it in this industry. You actually start to expect it in every industry. And this is where we see opportunities for startup innovation, because they see that big companies aren't making those changes. So they came in and disrupted big industries. And so what stood in the way of that? The important thing about Generation C was that it's a cross-generational group, whatever age, 25, 45, 55, you tend to go through the customer journey with self-interest, and you tend to hold to the standard of that journey your favorite experiences in other areas. And so what essentially that does is challenge the very construct of our business. Every single day we show up to work, we are measured on how we work within this construct. The C-suite is measuring success based on the series of those constructs, and it all makes sense. But yet every single day, the customers on this side making decisions in their own way, in their own right, and that is their standard. And that creates an experience divide between the two. So before the pandemic, this was the opportunity for disruption. This is why we saw so many of our favorite brands, so many of our favorite industries just completely struggle, because no one on the traditional side was actually trying to build bridges or trying to move towards the customer. They were building bridges back to them and expecting the customer to sort of compromise and continue to do business with them, when in fact what was happening was that the world was introducing new and more innovative solutions to the customer, which then further made us either increasingly irrelevant or eventually obsolete. And this is a visual metaphor for then how that customer sees the world. We tend to see the world, we're not our customer, we're caught up in these confines, these processes, these measures, and every single day that customer is moving in their own direction. This is a sidewalk in China that essentially serves as that metaphor for you have a construct for people who are not digital. You have to build highways and roads and experiences for people who are digital, and they have to coexist. And when we think about our customer journey, for example, or we think about our policies, we think about our processes, all of this is not designed for that digital first brain. It's just trying to make it all exist together. And this is where it breaks down. Because if you look subconsciously inside of a digital first customer before the pandemic, the things that were important to them were impatience, relevance, immediacy, convenience, accuracy. Everything had to be experiential, personalized. It had to be integrated and frictionless. If I jump to this, to real world, it had to feel like that fast. Just look at anybody who spends time on TikTok or Snapchat and then try to put a big book in their hands and see how well they could sit there and just go right to reading it. It's just really difficult because they've literally been rewired. So what this says is we have to reimagine our processes, policies, touch points, our experiences for this brain, right? And this is going to come clearer here in the pandemic world as we get to it. One of the things that I've noticed over the last 20 years was that everybody wanted to deliver an Amazon-like experience for their business. The conferences that I've presented at, the companies that I work to, they always say this, we want to do something that's a little bit more Amazon-like. And when you actually Google that, the number of results is out of this world. And you will see articles about Amazon-like experience for everything: healthcare, finance, banking, automotive purchases, you name it. This is what happens when we don't look at that experience divide and then try to give an Amazon-like experience. You create your own competitors. Every single one of these companies, and so many more logos that couldn't fit on here, has each in their own way disrupted their industry, whether it's shoes, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the mattress industry, whether it's the food preparation world. Every single one of these has looked specifically at that experience divide. And I know, because I've advised a lot of these companies, to see exactly how they can deliver a digital first solution, AKA product, and then a digital first business model that supports that service in order to hit that experience divide and disrupt you. And investors are looking for that opportunity as well. So this is why I say that the faster you can disrupt yourself, the faster you defend yourself against people that are actually looking to disrupt you. So now let's look at then, oh, and last thing I want to say is that I often hear psychologically a response that says, hey, well, I don't compete against any of those companies, so this isn't relevant. The thing is that every single one of these companies has changed the experience your customer has. So whether you're in pharmaceuticals, whether you're in laboratory equipment, supply chain, you are a human being. And if you use these services, you have been rewired for this, to train you to be at the center of these experiences, to be intuitive, to be seamless, to be fast. And so the minute you go into an experience, regardless of industry, that isn't like this, you compare it to this, and it feels outdated. It just feels outdated. And you start to then question your choices. And so this has only accelerated in the COVID world. In fact, my own research has now evolved into what I'm calling Generation N, again, for novel, playing off the novel economy, in that everybody who was Generation C coming into lockdowns, they were able to thrive in that they just already knew how to shop. They already knew how to communicate. They already knew how to connect. So even though they were disrupted, they were in a good place to continue their digital behaviors because it actually thrived in this world. But now you have everybody else who might have been casually digital or just completely against it or not using it or a late adopter, who now suddenly had to embrace and adopt digital in order to thrive over the past year, or just survive, or stay connected. And while they all came in at their own pace, they all started to come in. And the phenomenon of that is once you do, you start to have the same expectations. You start to, your eyes open and you see a whole new world that you didn't see before. And once you taste it, you can't go back and say, oh, no, I actually miss rotary telephones. You actually start to go forward with what it is that you enjoy and you want more of it. It's just a human condition. But it's not just digital first. Now we have something that's powerful, that's within, and it's a somatic marker. And the somatic marker is essentially an emotional bookmark that embeds itself within our psyche, our minds, our emotion. So, for example, many of us might not ever see toilet paper or sanitizer the same way again. It's just sort of a simple reflection of a somatic marker, in that we've all been deeply transformed during this time. It creates links to memories that are visceral emotional responses that have already in this year alone changed our values, changed how we spend our time, changed how we spend our money and where we don't, uh, why we save our money, what we do with our time, the things that we value in terms of aspirationally. So, for example, in our own Salesforce research, we found that things like trust, things like societal impact have now just skyrocketed to the top of needs for businesses that we want to work with. Why this is so important is that COVID-19 is probably going to be something that we reference for a long time. In some cases, it's made us angry, frustrated, worried, anxious, and all of those things combined are going to connect with us this time and will forever sort of change how we think. Think about World War II, for example, and how people who lost everything did not necessarily go out and then start spending all of their money and acquiring all kinds of assets. They just kind of held on to stuff, and family became more important for them, for example. That type of transformation is happening right now. And this is all from real-time data, from real-time engagement in just the last year alone of my own research. Let's look at, for example, the first 90 days of lockdowns. E-commerce, according to McKinsey, accelerated by 10 years of growth in 90 days. Once you go digital first, in this case, because you had to, it's not like you're going to go back and say, well, I didn't appreciate all those conveniences. I think some of the biggest complaints we saw from this have been related to cardboard boxes and having to recycle more, not necessarily from having the conveniences of things brought to you quickly. Our own research shows that now there is a digital imperative that customers, so business customers and consumers, so we didn't want to leave anybody out, want you to introduce new and better ways to get existing products and services. In many cases, again, for that accidental narcissist, they want you to expand your customer engagement methods, and they want you to offer new types of products and services. So essentially, this says that more than half of customers and consumers want you to innovate, business model innovation. And basically, everybody wants you to digitally transform. So they're saying this because they don't want to go back to the way things were. But here's the thing. This is the driver for me. In fact, this is the big inspiration for my next book. This is also McKinsey data. This is worldwide by country. The number at the top is the percentage of customers who have experimented with a new business during COVID. The bottom number is the percentage range of customers expected to stay with those new behaviors and continue to adopt new behaviors. So essentially what this says is loyalty has blown up. It's up for grabs, that retention is the most critical thing right now, and that acquisition is your greatest opportunity right now. So if I had to read into this, and if I had to predict what would happen in 2021, 2022, once we start to get out with that vaccine in place and restore in-person, but also digital first, these hybrid-like experiences, if you are not delivering experiences that maximize that somatic marker, that build upon those relationships that customers want, you are about to see another wave of disruption. because they're not going to go backwards. They're going to expect to continue to deal with businesses that cater to them. Essentially, what they're saying is that experience divide that existed all these years is not going to exist in my life moving forward. I am now in control. I am now going to find solutions that meet my needs. And that need centers around experience. 84% of customers say that an experience that you provide is as important as your products and service. And an experience is an emotional reaction to any moment. When I hit your website, when I talk to somebody, when I call your contact center, when I go through paperwork, whatever it is, that's an experience. And how I feel about those experiences, if they do not align with the experiences that I have and that I love, then they don't. And I start exploring my options. And so this is why all innovation is personal. You have to challenge yourself to see something from someone else's perspective, not your own. And that is counterintuitive because your experience, your expertise, your successes have got you to this moment right now. So we are qualified in many ways to say, I'm going to make this decision that's going to be in the best interest for our business and our customers. And so what that does is it gives us this sort of purview of the world that says that decision looks good, let's go with it. But when you take the perspective of someone else who's going through this transformation differently and quite personally, and so are we, by the way, we're all human beings going through this, you see it through a new lens. And suddenly it blows up the entire process of everything that we thought was innovation, but wasn't in fact what the customer either wanted and needed or didn't know that they wanted, and now they can't live without it now that they've tried it. So this sets the stage essentially for experience innovation. And I'm going to make sure that we leave some time here. But experience innovation is essentially, when you hear the word empathy, don't have that reaction that I hear so many people have, which is, oh, another buzzword. Here we go. Now, empathy is just simply asking you to look at the lives of, for example, customers through their eyes, what they value, what they love, what they seek, how they experience your products and brands, how they experience other products and brands that they love. And looking at those, even if they're outside of your industry, looking at those for new opportunities to deliver surprise and magic, to deliver function, intuition, to strip out the friction, to make technology invisible in many cases, because that is then how we learn how to be the Uber of our industry or the Airbnb of our industry. And there's a million places to do that. But I can tell you that in those cases, when 84% of your customers say that an experience is as or more important than products and services, there's another stat that's not in here that most of your customers will pay a significant margin over the current price if they know they're going to get a good experience. All signs show that experiences actually correlate to growth, to margins, and to revenue. And so if you look even in the smallest of places in your customer journey as it exists today, and you design for a digital first mindset, even if it's an analog touch point, like that sidewalk in China, you will find that you actually start to reduce friction, start to create better experiences, even in the smallest of cases. And in the biggest of cases, you realize that you can transform your culture, your products, your services, your processes, your policies, and even how you work. And remember, once we get that pandemic, once we get that vaccine, and we start to say, hey, the pandemic is waning, it's in our rearview mirror, we're not done. We're going to continue to evolve. We're going to continue to adopt new technologies. We're going to continue to have to disrupt ourselves to stay in line with experiences, because everything that's happening and everything that's coming is essentially showing us what new standards of the world could look like. And these then become those standards for engagement. And look, this is a concept of Apple Glass. This is not Apple's asset in any way, shape, or form. But the idea of it is that this is 2022, and that's next year. And so while we're all here today in our Zoom meeting, we have to think about our structure, our schedules, the time that we dedicate to the things we have to do versus the things that we're not getting to. And this is, again, why I talk about innovation as such a personal thing. It's a commitment that you make to yourself. I often say if you're waiting for somebody to tell you what to do, you're on the wrong side of innovation. These times are novel. They're new and unusual. They didn't exist. There's no playbook. There's nothing that says that we can't go and start to build towards that future. And all data is showing us that customers are moving and accelerating in ways that are creating that experience divide, expanding that experience divide. And so if you want to give yourself a sense of purpose, focus there. And then create, never stop trying to either close that experience divide or create an experience divide for someone else. This is a quote from Steve Jobs that I just had to share because I stumbled across a video of his last week. And basically, it talks about how many companies forget what it means to make great products. He talks about how when he was ousted from Apple and they brought in John Scully, someone who was just a massive leader in the CPG space, what they did was then invest in sales and marketing to take over the organization. And look, sales and marketing are obviously critical roles in the organization, but so is innovation. And his point was, when you lose innovation, sales and marketing can only then push what was, not what is and what needs to be. And you need a balance of all of it. And so I'm going to just kind of head into the home stretch here. But what I'd like you to do is create space first for that mental transformation of not accepting the status quo anymore, not accepting excuses for innovation, not accepting iteration as innovation. Just at least give yourself the space to start to see everything that has been working against innovation, and then give yourself time to either learn or talk to people or look at customers in a new way. We're already seeing, even though this has been a trend for a long time, we're already seeing people dedicate now a real, not just a trophy title, but a real role in looking at constant business and operational model innovation, and looking at ways to then move forward by asking different questions, where we look at, can we answer these questions in ways that disrupt ourselves or challenge ourselves, that challenge our own beliefs, our own conventions? Because you're either going to give them what they want or you're going to meet unmet needs, because the both together overlap around innovation or over innovation. And look, even those brands that I showed you on the D2C digital first slide, they too have to continue this. We call it jumping the curve in Silicon Valley, right? You find a product opportunity, you create it, you move it, right? This is what Steve Jobs was talking about as well. Here is where traditional sales and marketing organizations just kind of get stuck selling that and creating sort of more and more quarter to quarter performance around this. But the real opportunity is, while you do that, you're supposed to be starting the next curve, because eventually you're going to have to jump to it, or someone will jump to it before you. And capping off the research that I had done with Capgemini, is essentially what we're doing is building a new construct for business, a business that didn't exist. If you had to invent a business to compete in the 2021, 2022 economy, what would it look like? Because this is what a lot of your competitors and also emerging competitors are trying to answer right now. So they're essentially building this new construct for the organization and not making excuses around it. They're doing it. So again, and this is the last slide, but innovation is something that begins with you. You have to close the distance between where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow, because it's only separated by the imagination of what's possible. I'd also say that the inspiration from what we're learning and seeing that's new, and then also taking the steps toward that new possibility. And really, this is why innovation is something that begins with you. So on that note, Anthony, I'll turn it back over to you and we'll go to questions.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was excellent. And yeah, we have some few questions. Actually, I wanted to jump in with a question first because I'm really kind of excited about this question. And I think it really fits in well. And then we'll jump to some of the questions that other people have presented. But my question is this. So you talked about digital first products and then digital first business models and how organizations should think about that. But In your experience, don't you think it's really, really hard for many legacy and traditional organizations to even make this mental mind shift leap? Isn't it easier for them to almost spin out a new startup that's digital first? In other words, to be able to do digital first business models and products, don't I need to be a digital first business to start with?
That's a great question, Anthony. And I don't know that there's any one answer to that. But I will tell you that some of the things that I've learned over the last, let's just say the last 10 to 12 years specifically, because this is when we started to see, for example, traditional companies do what you just said, spin out or create a separate unit dedicated to innovation, or they'd acquire innovative companies or groups and let them operate independently. One really famous organization that did this was Walmart. They did all of those things. And initially, each one of those business units, for example, one of their early acquisitions was a company in South San Francisco that was solely dedicated to improving the Walmart.com e-commerce experience. Because they had found that everything from search to results to cataloging was broken. And so this team was dedicated to fixing that. I can't even remember, something like 12 weeks. The percentage of growth on Walmart.com was just phenomenal, almost incalculable because it was so huge. So they did more of that. Then they made the mistake of then thinking that that was just the simple formula. So they brought the Walmart culture onto these organizations. One famously was after they acquired Jet.com, they told Jet.com that they couldn't have their happy hours anymore at 5 o'clock. Because that wasn't the Walmart way. Of course, everybody at Jet.com revolted, and that's part of the Jet.com culture, right? Alcohol or not, it's just about how you work and how you live. That is what culture really is about. So Walmart took that back, and then what Walmart realized was that, well, maybe instead of trying to impose the Walmart way onto these companies, maybe they should let some of these companies affect the C-suite at Walmart. So they started bringing in some of the top players at these organizations into the actual C-suite to then recharge and inspire and empower. That's key, because otherwise you'll have a revolution. The thinking inside of corporate, so that they can start to change the DNA and the culture within the organization. So it's kind of all of those things, I guess. But where it fails commonly is when you don't actually allow for that new DNA to come in, and your antibodies, if you will, go and kill it. And that's the natural response, by the way. So we have to be prepared for that and be prepared for change and continuous change.
Yeah, I think that excellent answer, Brian. I think that's one of the things organizations need to understand, especially if they're a very traditional organization, that in order to achieve this transformation, digital transformation, we have to change the DNA of our own organization to really start to think digital first. And it's not, it's not like we can just strap that on without doing this transformation to some degree ourselves. So
Right.
excellent answer. So let's turn to some of the questions that people have submitted in the chat screen. And if any of you have questions you want to submit to Brian, feel free to type it into the chat screen we have here. So the first question was, eras have historically been defined by the technology that was used: Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, etc. What will this era be named? I guess we'll skip the Silicon era and give it
what a great question. I don't know. I'm caught off guard. I can only tell you that one of the reasons that I gave this time the name the novel economy is because I needed it to force my thinking into carving up these times into then what needs to happen in order to achieve a future that you want. So, for example, without giving it a name yet, I'm still going to call it the novel economy. Think about where you are January 2023 and where you need to be and where you want to be. But also think about how the world is going to be radically different by 2023. And then work your way back to 2021 January, and then, 2022, and then work your way to where we are today, because that's how we're going to define what the next age is going to be. Don't the momentum that we have today is success is a poor teacher when it comes to innovation, because it kind of lulls you into belief that your momentum is the momentum, when in fact there is a different trajectory that we need to also pursue, and that that novel economy or whatever we call it. I also wrote an article in Adweek calling what did I call it? It's a name around, it's epochal memory, where it introduced a new type of memory in us, related to the semantic marker, in that this is an epoch, and so there is credence to giving it a name, but that epochal memory is also a catalyst for understanding then the emotional side of transformation and why people are changing and how we can change ourselves too.
Well, maybe in your honor, it'll be the novel epoch. So here's another question. Any thoughts on these two trends that are evolving? Will they stick, and what will be the effects of community? So the first trend was Kierland is the first European city that uses a digital local economy and increase citizen participation. And then the second trend was a 12 billion parameter version of GP3 trained to generate images from text description using a data set of text imaging pairs. So one relates to digital currency is boosting the economy, one relates to AI. What do you think their effects are going to be on the community?
Well, and also if the person asking the question saw the slide around the fourth industrial revolution, right? These are two branches of two things listed on that slide, right? Every single one of them are going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of branches underneath them, AI especially, also crypto and blockchain. All of these things are going to claw their way into experimentation. And all of these things are going to find a rhythm or a cadence into applications that we either know or don't know yet. So, for example, with AI, we're looking at this in conversational commerce right now. In experimentations, I had, if anybody's on Clubhouse, I was on a Clubhouse panel with a fully mature AI model, of which then we all had conversations with the AI model, specifically designed for high level conversations, not in depth in a specific industry, but it's being trained in that regard. And so you can see the potential of this in the crypto world. We of course, everybody watches Bitcoin or refers to Bitcoin, but we see tokens like we talked about with the Kings of Leon in the music industry, but also there's a company called Rally.io that's introducing personal cryptocurrency. So Anthony, you could have your own coin, for example, and it's traded on a public trading desk. And you could find ways for that in terms of a reciprocity economy. You could gift your coins. People could buy coins in order to have your time, for example, and these coins gain in value. So in terms of, instead of giving you $1 for a service, I buy your coin, and while that coin might cost me 50 cents from now, that coin might be worth $15 from now based on the volume of those tradings. So then, but if you put blockchain into the mix and you then introduce the transparency of transactions, you really start to see that, well, it isn't just cryptocurrency, it's this democratization of sort of bringing people together to do more things out in the open. So politics, business, supply chain, insurance, finance, a lot of these things that were just sort of kept in the back as the secret sauce, or as in government, just sort of as hiding the hiding the dirt. This now becomes a way for us to all participate in ways where you don't even have to know what blockchain is or crypto is. It's just a matter of how we do things together with a better sense of purpose of doing things in the open, doing things together, doing things with a better outcome for all of us, etc.
Excellent answer. And I just recently did some work with a large government ministry, and that was one of the things we talked about with blockchain, how it can drive a lot more transparency in government interactions with the public. And so there's a lot of things that communities and governments and citizen participation can benefit from some of those technologies. Excellent. So let me ask, here's another question that came in, referring to your novel economy phase 3. The individual says the word disruption didn't show up there as part of thriving. Why?
Disruption was actually an intentional omission. So disruption is often used as sort of a business strategy. We're going to go disrupt. I tend to look at disruption as a measure, and if you if you can align with me on the definition that I gave it, which was doing the new things that make the old things obsolete, then essentially it's a measure of how well our combination of iteration and innovation has done. So you could actually say that a measure of phase 3 is disruption, wherever you're focusing on concentrating your iteration, your innovation, and the balance of those two things.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
maybe I'll work that into my narrative.
I didn't know if you're just trying to avoid the buzzword or, it is a little bit one of those overused buzzwords, but that's okay. Here's another question. The customer experience innovation considers so many things. The first one is culture. So how do we change the culture and the mindset of leaders to really think about customer experience?
Culture is everything. I'm sure you've heard that quote, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. A good friend of mine, I was having this great conversation with, he leads a culture science-based culture design company out of Florida. And it's fascinating the things that he's learned. And we were talking about that quote, and we basically agreed that culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast. Culture is the strategy. And the reason it is the strategy is because culture is a reflection of what you say we do and where we're going, and how we all decide we're going to work together to achieve that vision, and how we all feel part of that mission in our own way and collectively, right? Culture today is a lot about employee surveys, a lot about employee communications, a lot about dashboards, a lot about management and 360 reviews, but none of that actually intentionally articulates, this is our future motivating state, this is where we're going, this is how we're going there together, these are all of the communications and the visual metaphors you're going to see along the way, here's how it affects you in the paycheck, and here's how it affects you in your growth trajectory within the organization. That's culture design. And we have to actually realize that in order to transform, whether that's digitally transform or however you want to think about it, whether you want to innovate, you need cultures to drive those things. That is the strategy. You can't just go innovate. You need a culture that supports that innovation. People have to feel safe. They have to feel like they can take risks. They have to feel rewarded even if they fail, because that's part of trying. That's moving forward. So it's counterintuitive in many ways, but that is where the most organizations will succeed, is because they laid that foundation for culture.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Brian. I believe that brings us to the top of the hour, and we'll be wrapping up our time together. We've very much enjoyed your presentation and your answers in this discussion. We want to thank everyone for participating with us. For all the people who registered for this webinar, we'll be sending out a recording. Hopefully we can get Brian to maybe share his presentation deck with us. And we'll share that around with everyone. And we just appreciate your time and wish everyone a great rest of your day. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye. Namaste.
Thank you very much from Nigeria.
Oh, excellent. You're welcome.